Hey guys, super quick video on how to make an angled taper cut on your table saw without any fancy jigs. You can see here, I am working on a range hood and these boards are level to the ground, but the ceiling is not. That happens all the time. This side is 1/8 inch tighter than over there. Hard to see in the video, but it's just a little. So it's a little amount, and if I cut a straight board, it's not going to work. It's not going to look right. I need the board to be slightly tapered. It needs to actually grow as it comes along. So how do I cut that? My table saw only does straight cuts. So here we are out of the table saw. You can see, as a basic concept, when you run a piece of wood through the table saw, it's against a rip fence. And that maintains a constant distance between the rip fence and the blade. And that will make a straight cut every single time. So how do you actually get an angled cut? Now, I've tried before to make an angled jig. The problem with that is if I run this through on an angled jig, a jig meaning, a scrap piece, something that you cut on an angle ahead of time, it doesn't work if you push the piece against that, because it will still have the same distance between the blade and the rip fence. So that doesn't work. What you actually need is for that distance between the blade and the rip fence to change as you're pushing it through so that it can actually grow or shrink depending on the angle you're trying to make. So how do I possibly do that? Well, number one, they sell jigs for that, taper cut jigs. So you can buy one and that will help you do it. And basically what it does is it holds the board on an angle, and while you push it through, it grows or shrinks depending on where you are pushing it through. And so they sell jigs for that. If you don't have one though, that's the little secret I'm going to share today. What I use is I will tape a piece of extra material onto the end of the board in the thickness of the angle I want. So that helps me also not have to do math. So if I know that the board needs to be 1/8 inch wider on one end or 1/4 inch wider, I tape that size of piece of material to it. And what that does is I push the board through. You can see that distance between the blade and the fence will change. As I start and push it through, it's going to start to grow like this because of that material here that's going to push it away from the rip fence. Now, one extra part to this trick is you can see here, my rip fence is only so long and my board is longer. And so this part wouldn't work. It's going to hit the end of the rip fence and stop. It's not really going to push out how I want. So I have to add one extra step if you have a longer board. And it can help if you have a skinnier cut too. You can see I don't have much material left and I don't want to get my fingers in there. So it can also help to use a spacer. So to do the spacer, I will put the spacer in first. And I just have to add this distance to the distance I actually want to cut. So it's pretty simple. Now that's nice and long. It's longer than my rip fence. And I can even clamp that down so it doesn't move. And now what I can do is take my angle cut piece and I can run it next to that spacer. And we can see, because of the spacer, it's going to hold that piece out on the angle I want as I cut. So let's fire up the table saw and watch that in action. So you can see here, after cutting, that with the spacer here, I've got a piece that's now narrower on this side and it tapers, hence the taper cut grows. It's bigger over here. And when you cut these, make sure you always use your push sticks, keep your fingers far away from it. And let's go ahead and test this piece. I don't need the spacer anymore, that's just for cutting, so I can go ahead and peel that off. So let's take our board up back into place. And there it is. It's looking really good. Now it is equidistant on the bottom, but at the top it grows by 1/8 inch from left to right to help make up that gap up there at the ceiling. And that's a taper cut without owning any taper jig. And just to recap, if I ran a piece of wood through the table saw on this against the rip fence and hold it flush, it's going to do a straight cut. But if I want it to be an angled cut, I can tape a piece, the dimension of that distance for my angle, and run it through, and then the distance will change as I run this through between the blade and the rip fence. It'll change where it's actually cutting and give me an angled piece at the end of the day.